the theory actually is something that was a result of my being in a course with Jessica Benjamin. And Jessica Benjamin is one of the leading writers in relational psychoanalysis. And she was talking about how she developed her theory of intersubjectivity, and that her theory came from studying Hegel. And as I sat there and listened, and my husband and I were in the same class, it dawned on us, Hegel was a Christian theologian before he was a philosopher. And there was no mention of the fact that there was a Christian subtext there. So I decided that I was going to research it, and that became the basis of the book. And what Jessica Benjamin was all about is that in the therapy relationship, there should be mutual recognition. That I see you for who you are, you see me for who I am, without all the projections. And so the title of my book was Toward Mutual Recognition, Psychoanalysis and Christianity. So let's do that with that as well. And that is the cover of my book. So let's begin. And I am going to be reading a good bit of this. Hopefully you'll follow. In psychoanalysis, many papers are read. And so this one was one I delivered and read. So. Everything flows, but the river comes from a source every time. It takes matter with it from the regions through which it has run. This colors its waters for a long time. Equally for that new form, there are remnants of an older one. There is no absolute cut between today and yesterday. There is no totally new work. And I guess that's one of the quotations that I had in the book, that let's not say that relational psychoanalysis is something totally brand new. We are drawing from other sources. The river that has come has brought with it a lot from the past. The piece from Hegel that I'm going to be focusing on is Hegel's ideas on incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. The cycle, and we'll be talking about where he got that from. And I'm connecting it with some ideas in psychoanalysis, identification, surrender, and because it's a Jewish psychoanalysis, they didn't talk about resurrection. And so resurrection and gratitude in my book are something that I develop because as a Christian, we don't just believe in death, we believe in resurrection. So, Freud, in group psychology and analysis of the ego, talked about an individual's mental life is not just the individual. It is also the social. It is also, oh, okay, thanks. It is also very much involved with other people. And contemporary psychoanalysis has developed, extended, and amended these aspects of Freud's work and asserts that relationship and the social milieu is very much a part of the life of the individual sitting with us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a roadmap so that you understand what Jessica Benjamin's ideas were and how it fit with Hegel and how it then fits with relational psychoanalysis and Christianity. And I'm hoping it'll make some sense. Okay. Hegel wrote Phenomenology of Spirit. And in Phenomenology of Spirit, he specifically talks about the passion of Christ from his incarnation to his crucifixion to his resurrection. And he uses that as one of the ways of understanding the development of history, that there are these phases through which history goes. Okay. Jessica Benjamin took Hegel's theory, and what she did, she focused on the central part in which Hegel is talking about the master-slave dialectic. for a person to be a master, they have to have a slave. But to be a slave, you have to have a master. So they're both linked together. You can't be one without the other. Okay? And she took that piece of Hegel's work and she connected it with Winnicott's work, where he talks about use of an object and surviving destruction. And Winnicott, being a Christian, wrote that paper thinking of the crucifixion of Christ, that Christ was crucified, but he wasn't destroyed. He survived, and that the therapist should be the same way. Now, Hegel's master-slave dialectic talked about a struggle of who's going to really be the master. If I choose not to be your slave, then you're not going to be a master. So I'm really your master. So it's a struggle to the death. And so she took both of those things and put it together as she developed the idea of mutual recognition. Meaning, I recognize the slave part of you, the master part of you. You recognize the slave part of me, the master part of me. And we become more at the same level. She entered Hegel's work at the middle part of his work at Crucifixion to develop her theory. So I thought to myself, okay, you're talking about the therapist's need to survive destruction so that the person can see you as a real person and you can see them as a real person. But that's the middle point. Isn't there something else in Hegel besides crucifixion? So I thought, well, let's look at incarnation. Is that something that's in there? And sure enough, I looked at incarnation, and then I looked at resurrection. And incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection are found in relational psychoanalysis. What I did is I moved away from just Hegel, and I looked at Paul Ricoeur, because Paul Ricoeur doesn't have the same stuck ideas as Hegel, and he has a whole book on recognition. So using Hegel and Ricoeur, I linked incarnation with identification, with when a person is recognized for who they are. I linked crucifixion with the surrender that needs to, and I'm going to explain all this as I go. Crucifixion with surrender to the process of therapy, surrender to a higher good, and resurrection with the moment in time where a person's eyes are changed and they realize that what the therapist is giving them is not because the therapist has to care, but because they do care, and I can be grateful, okay? And same with the child. So, okay, it'll get clearer as we go. There's a picture of Paul Ricoeur. So what Paul Ricoeur added is that he uses the lexicon, the dictionary, to develop an understanding of words. So he took the word recognition in his book, and it has 3 different meanings. The first one is to acknowledge the existence of somebody. That's where I got identification, okay? And that connects with incarnation. The second definition that Ricoeur had was that when you recognize somebody, like I recognize Marek as a leader in this group, I offer him recognition of his rights as a leader to make decisions. So I surrender to his role, okay? And that is crucifixion. I don't have all the power. I can't make all the decisions. The third definition is acknowledging the differentiated status through giving appreciation. We want to recognize so-and-so by giving them this medal or this honor. So there's 3 definitions to recognition, and it links with the 3 parts of therapy and with incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. So what I do in my book, and what I'll be talking about with you, is We want to look at how this process worked between God and humanity, between the mother and the infant, and between the analyst and the analysand. Okay. So, where we're going to end up, and what I think is something that isn't emphasized enough in our culture, is where does gratitude come from? Where do we find, how do we find gratitude in the literature, in the theory, and we will end up there. Okay, so the first movement toward mutual recognition, identification and incarnation. Identification in infancy. Before the infant's birth, the mother is not seen by the fetus, but felt and heard. Treatherton suggests that the first awareness a human being can have of another is transmitted through the interior of the body of the mother to her fetus. Similarly, during pregnancy, mother has felt and heard. After birth, she sees. Meltzoff reports that infants as young as 42 minutes can imitate the facial expression of an adult model through cross-modal matching, and suggested that this cross-modal matching provides the earliest experience of like me. At the neurological level, Galeesi asserts that through the firing of mirror neurons, a shared intersubjective space mapped by mirroring mechanisms is crucial in bonding neonates and infants to the social world. But it also acquires a different role. It provides a self with the capacity to simultaneously entertain self-other identification and difference. You're familiar with the mirror neurons, that as I see you, this is being encoded in my mind, and it's giving me an ability to see you, see me, and also differentiate self and other because of differences. Identification and analysis. How does this compare? In my analytic practice, I hear the voice message of a patient, and like mother and infant, I wonder, who will this person be? During my return call, I register their cues, and they register mine. When my patient arrives, I listen and continue listening for many sessions as I seek to provide a holding environment. I look as well, and I see my new patient looking at me, probing my demeanor, seeing me, seeing him. I strive to identify with her and narrate her story in a way that resonates and promotes thinking, mentalization. Benjamin describes this process of identification of the patient's experience of my mind beginning to understand their mind, stating, Mitchell rightly picks up on identification as crucial to my understanding of how we solve the dilemma of helping the person who does not yet have their own voice. I identify with them, they identify with me, and that helps me to help them understand themselves. Identification is analog to incarnation in Hegel. See, what I'm trying to say is, she took Hegel, but she only took the middle part. The reality is, in therapy, we are doing incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection. And I want you to understand that when you sit with your patient and understand them, that is a piece of what Christ did for us in the incarnation. It was not enough to have the law on Mount Sinai. He came to be with us, to identify with humanity. And that is what we do with our patients. Hegel's presentation of the incarnation of God can be seen as an analog to mother and infant, analyst and analysand. God identified with humans in his incarnation so that humanity could see in Jesus who they were meant to be, and that Jesus could identify with the sufferings of his creation and hear the other's voices. For Hegel, this incarnational identificatory initiative of God's love is the essence of Trinity and the loving force for life that gives us the first movement toward recognition. Did you understand that part? Okay. In a way, we're all mini Christs to our patients following that path. But of course, it doesn't stop with incarnation, it goes to crucifixion. Surrender in infancy. In mutual identification, the mother-infant dyad experiences difference, first evidenced in markedness, the differentiated though empathic response of the mother. Benign difference soon deploys as a clash, hopefully culminating in the infant's capacity to view the mother as separate. Okay, mommy, I'll obey. Winnicott presents the idea that in order to be able to use the object, we first have to destroy it, as Benjamin weds Winnicott with Hegel's notion of negation. Okay? So, in other words, when the child beats up on us and mother says, no, this is what has to be. I'm really sorry you don't like this. When the mother doesn't just give in and comply and capitulate, the infant comes to realize, I'm not manipulating mother. Mother's not under my control. And their omnipotence becomes surrendered. We have a lot of people going around in the world who never gave up omnipotence because they feel they can manipulate everybody. They never had a parent that said, I love you, and you also have to listen to what I'm saying. Okay? And with that, the child recognizes mother's a separate person, and I'm a separate person. So when I go to work, that's a separate person, and I'm a separate person. So that crucifixion is very important for being able to see the other person as truly another person, not an extension of myself. The infant surrenders to a higher principle of moral thirdness in Benjamin's terms. So in other words, that, the child says, no, I don't want to go to school, I don't want to go to school. So the moral third, the important idea there is getting an education is important. You may not want to go to school today, but there's something more important than what you want today. There's something you need to do. There's a third. Okay. Surrender in analysis. In treatment, patients and analysts begin to assert their individualities, colonizing each other's minds via their histories. These distorted perceptions catapult the therapeutic dyad into enactments fueled by painful, unacknowledged, unmourned memories. Opposition develops. Both therapist and patient surrender to a process that will involve confusion, pain, and crucifixion. For each, surrender to a process, a third, with belief in the benevolent goal, carries the treatment forward. For instance, let's say a patient decides that they want to keep changing the time of their visit. And you as a therapist want to have a good holding frame, and your time is 2 o'clock on Thursday. But the patient, I have this appointment and this appointment. The first couple times you go with it. But you realize after a point in time that the patient is enacting something with you. The patient has become their mother, who is always not meeting the child's needs and wanting the child to always adapt to what the parent wanted. And they're acting it out with you. So it becomes an enactment. And then you say, I understand that there were a few times that you really needed to have this, but I think something more is going on here. I'm kind of wondering, have you experienced this anywhere where people are kind of changing things on you and expecting you to da-da-da-da? And what comes out is that mom did that all the time. That's the way I had to live. And as a result of the enactment and the clash, And at first they don't understand. It's like, well, you're just being selfish. You don't want to change your time for me. As a result of dealing with that, it's crucifixion on both parts. Each person comes to understand where it's coming from, and that gives the possibility of resurrection to a new understanding. So, okay, surrender as analog to crucifixion in Hegel. For Hegel, Jesus' incarnation was not sufficient for reconciliation. Humanity saw Jesus through its own projections. Fully human in his needs and disappointments, Jesus was not covered, shielded by his divinity. He became the broken and reviled person, relinquishing power and surrendering to destruction. See, when we are in the therapy session, people have to see us like someone from their past. We have to be willing to bear that cross. Freud said the transference is a cross. Like Christ, we have to be willing to be seen as sinful, okay, in order for those ghosts of the past to emerge. Now, we're not Christ, so we do make boo-boos, and so we help the process along. So, but in the middle of that, God redeems it because things from the past emerge. Okay. Hegel said, the life of the Spirit is not the life that shrinks from death and crucifixion and keeps itself untouched, but life that endures the crucifixion and maintains itself in it. Okay? And that is what we do in the middle of the therapeutic process. But like I said, I took psychoanalytic theory and I added the Christian perspective of resurrection and gratitude. Now, this is going to be a little difficult, but I think it's really important in our day and age to talk about whatever happened to gratitude. I don't know about you, but less and less in our culture, I find people really being grateful for what they have. There's usually this thing of, you know, I should have had this or I should have had that. And psychoanalysis can contribute to that, where people feel that they've been deprived of so much and there's no ability to understand gratitude. So what I did was I took Ricoeur's work and I applied it to the word gratitude. And there's 3 definitions. Gratitude is the quality of being grateful. It also is having good feelings towards somebody that gives you something, but it also is a desire to do something in return to somebody. So there's 3 definitions there of gratitude. And so I came up with the definition for gratitude that is psychoanalytic. The quality of being grateful to a benefactor whose unmerited, you didn't deserve it, goodness or grace prompts a desire to do something in return. Now, Melanie Klein is the last person that really talked about gratitude in psychoanalysis. So I wondered, why did the discovery or the exploration of gratitude stop after Melanie Klein? She said the capacity to enjoy fully what's been received and the experience of gratitude influence the character and relation with other people. It is not for nothing that in saying grace before meals, Christians use the words, "For what we are about to receive, may the Lord make us truly thankful." The words imply that one asks for one quality, gratitude, that makes one free from resentment and envy. Okay? So let's try and understand why after Klein did gratitude disappear from writings in psychoanalysis. The disappearance of gratitude with Donald Winnicott. The concept of the death instinct could be described as a reassertion of the principle of original sin. Part of the reason that it disappeared with Winnicott is because Winnicott focused on the beautiful child, the infant. And he didn't like original sin. He didn't like thinking about sin. So it was what does the bad mother do to the infant, to hurt the infant, the good infant? Klein used to look at the good mother and the child that has envy of the mother's breast. So Winnicott focused on the goodness and Klein focused on the badness, and neither of them took both together. I propose that it's the gap between Klein's destructive infant, whose aggression might bring retaliation from the mother, and Winnicott's good infant, who deserves the mother's preoccupation, that in that gap, gratitude disappears. Okay? The infant's entitlement becomes a starting point. The infant deserves everything. Gratitude gets lost there because there's no awareness that the infant is born with certain brokenness already. Some infants are more demanding than others. Some infants are born more cranky than others. The mother, too, is broken, but the mother sacrifices and the infant is wonderful and beautiful. And there's something that we need to keep of both gratitude for both mother and infant as reflective of God's beauty and of brokenness. So the piece that I feel has been missing in psychoanalytic literature is that if we only look at the bad things parents did to children and we really ignore that children are born with certain predispositions, good, bad, and indifferent, then there's little place in the child for being grateful for the sacrifice of mother. Sometimes mother has to give more to certain children than to others. And that's where there's gratitude. It's not all entitlement. Okay. So are you understanding what I'm saying? It's a little bit obscure. What is your question there?
I can't formulate the question, but
it's a little hard to understand. Okay. Okay, so Melanie Klein talked about what we call the depressive position, which means life is not this or this, it's both. Melanie Klein emphasized that the mother is good and it's the child that is envious of the breast and wants everything it can get. Okay, so it really she gave a bad impression of the child. Winnicott couldn't stand Klein and couldn't stand inborn sin. He went all the way to the other side and he said, good enough, mother. You give the child what it needs, it's going to blossom and grow like a flower. And he did not look at all at inborn sin, that a child is born with certain, you don't have to teach a child to lie. You don't have to teach a child to, it's in there, okay? But he wouldn't look at that. So everything was, the infant is wonderful and the mother is bad. And so where are you going to find gratitude? There's no place for gratitude there for both. And that's what I'm talking about, that a biblical view of human nature became missing. That we're made in the image of God and wondrous and beautiful, but we're also broken and fallen. Okay? And there's gratitude and there's also awareness of brokenness. So I wed Klein, Winnicott, and Ricoeur. For Melanie Klein, the giving mother who encounters the destructive attacks of the infant emerges as an object of appreciation. For Winnicott, the magnificent infant supported by loving parents evokes an appreciative gaze. For Ricoeur, both mother and infant are far more touched by evil and more abundant in goodness than either Klein or Winnicott have envisioned. This contrast between brokenness and goodness leads Ricoeur to the exaltation. Man is the joy of yes in the sadness of the finite. That we are amazingly and wonderfully made, but we are finite and we are broken. So what Paul Ricoeur really does is he returns us to the idea that there is evil. There is evil. And Winnicott really does not talk much about evil. And if we don't reckon with evil, then when we have good, we don't really appreciate it all that much. It is important to understand the darkness to appreciate the light. You with me? Okay. Evil causality, radical evil defined. Despite being capable of achieving many aims and goods in the world, the human being remains at the bottom, a fallen creature who is racked by a fundamental incapacity to fulfill his or her teloi, his or her goals. That even though we are so capable of many things, at the core, we can't fulfill everything God intended us to fulfill. The incapacity belonging to capable man, that is what Ricoeur talks about. We're capable, but we are also incapable. Then, so he's defining what is evil. Capable man who is also incapable. Evil causality. We are humans, we're sufferers, and we're also people that produce suffering. We're both. Okay? While humans choose to do evil, they're also the victims of it. The thrownness into evil is inescapable because we belong to a history of evil that is always already there. Is always already there, and it catches us in a web before we have even parted from the womb. See, we're thrown into situations that we didn't choose to be thrown into. And we live in those situations, and while we have choices, we don't always realize that we have choices. So we become entangled in evil. And I'm contrasting this with a radical Winnicottian idea that all you have to do is put sunshine and water and everybody grows up fine. It's not simple like that. Okay. So how do we know, how can we scientifically talk about the broken human condition from the moment of conception? And where I turn to is epigenetics. The term epigenetics was first coined by C.H. Waddington in 1942 and refers to the study of the biological switch called an epigenome that sits on a genome, guiding it to turn on or off. Environmental factors have been shown to impact the actions of epigenomes, causing changes in physical health that contradict inherited DNA. In other words, you can have a certain DNA structure, but these epigenomes sit on top of the genomes, and if there's stress, war, bad food, whatever, it can switch the gene so that you are actually living in a way, your body is acting in a way that it was not intended genetically, the epigenomes. Okay? So that the environment perceived by the fetus comes from the maternal blood which it receives and is nourished by. So in other words, the fetus is in the mother is going through stress. What happens? The fetus is picking up on these signals. Its brain is being formed. It may have been born with perfect genetics, but something happens to the genetics of the fetus because of the stress that the mother is going through. And this was looked at way back in the 40s. Okay? These are blood-borne information signals that not only affect the mother, but the same signals cross the placenta and affect the genetics and behavior of the developing infants. So not only has environmental impact on the fetus been established, but researchers have demonstrated that human epigenetic changes are able to be passed to future generations. Initially, such research was limited to animal studies in which there was transgenerational transmission. but longitudinal studies of human subjects which tracked variables such as the effects of nutrition, smoking, stress, have established transgenerational non-GNA mutations. In this study by Lars Bygren, this one, 3 generations, in individuals born in the remote region of Sweden, the data suggested that just one winter of overeating in childhood could initiate epigenetic changes that could cause one's grandchildren to die decades before their peers did. Okay. So we're saying it is nearly impossible, I would say impossible, to be a human being and not be impacted by brokenness. So we're all born with that brokenness. Okay? But epigenetics also does a good thing for us. It says that if we can bring healing into a life, the same epigenomes can be switched differently. There can be change. It is not predetermined. Okay? And that's part of the role that God gives us. Okay? So did you get this whole epigenome thing? I think it's a fascinating area of study. I go in my, this is a little dense because this chapter ended up being a chapter in a philosophy book. And so I had to make it fairly dense. So I hope I'm explaining it as best as I can. I don't even understand it fully, but so Ricoeur uses the term fallible to describe our motivations. Okay. Pleasure and responsibility, reason and feeling. It may be said that man's specific limitation makes evil merely possible. In this case, fallibility designates the point of least resistance through which evil can enter. In other words, we have weak spots in us. And we don't have to choose to do the wrong thing, but we have weak spots. Those are areas of fallibility. Let's say the weak spot is, I need to prepare for this presentation, but I really want to sit and I want to read a book, and I don't want to prepare. Okay, I have a couple choices here. I can go one way or the other. Do I feel forced to go one way? No, I can make a choice, but it's my fallibility. I'm tired of studying and all. Okay, that's the area of weakness. But what happens then? Where does evil enter? Okay. Ricoeur's observations echo Fairbairn, who described the bondage to internal objects. Ricoeur privileges the agentic nature of a person capable of choice. But like Fairbairn, he sees it as hobbled by being pulled to what is evil. Evil, in fact, consists of a reversal of priorities. So let's say my priority is, I need to prepare this presentation. But in my mind, I'm thinking of my father used to make me do hard work even when I wanted to do something nice. And I'm angry at my father. So what do? I have this weakness of, oh, I'm tempted to do something that I want to do, but I have this thing that I should do. That internal object from Fairbairn in my mind is yelling at me, saying you ought to do this. My reaction is to say, I don't want to do that. So what do? I pick up the book and I read. And then I sin against you because I don't study. Okay? So there's the fallibility. There's the area of weakness. But because of my connection to my father, who's still talking in my head, I chose to do something that wasn't good. Now, I don't know that this is all going on in my mind, but that's what's pulling me. I just think I want to read. I'm tired. Okay? So that's where Ricoeur says evil comes in. It's not that we have to do evil, but we are pulled toward it because the sins of the parents which are visited. And that's where Ricoeur and Fairbairn come together so beautifully. So Ricoeur concludes, the evil that I assume responsibility makes manifest, shows me an evil that I cannot assume responsibility for, but that I participate in every time that evil enters the world as if for the first time. In other words, I take responsibility for the fact that I wanted to read the book instead of studying. But I can't fully assume responsibility because it was that stupid father in my head that forced me to do it. But when I choose to follow that stupid father in my head, it's as if I'm doing it for the first time. I can't blame him. It's like, you can't say the devil made me do it or Adam and Eve's sin made me do it. No, I had a choice and I yielded to sin there. So this is how Rick Kerr talks about evil, and I think it's a very fair way of presenting it. We have choice, but we are in bondage. Okay. So, but Rick Kerr does not stop there. Original goodness. And this is, I think, one of the beautiful parts of Rick Kerr's work. Okay. Radical evil is understood only in contrast to its opposite, superabundant good. Where Rick Kerr, who was a Christian, ends up is that God's goodness exceeds the power of evil. And he writes, to infect is not to destroy. To tarnish is not to ruin. Boy, I think that we lost a few of those lines. Is not to ruin. The symbol points toward the relation of radical evil to the very being of man, to the destination of man. It suggests that evil, however positive, however seductive, however infective it may be, cannot make a man something other than a man or a woman. Infection is not a defection, in a sense that the disposition and functions that make the humanity of man unmade. Evil is not equal to good. Wickedness is not something that replaces the goodness of humans. It is the staining, the darkening, the disfiguring of innocence and beauty. However radical evil may be, it cannot be as primordial, ancient as goodness. So where Rick Kerr ends up saying is, we are made first and foremost in the image of God. And even though evil entered in, it has not erased. So, a more profound and radical capacity for human moral good remains and can be traced to the gift of existence given by the Creator. Rick Kerr teaches us that Klein's destructive infant is not equal to the infant whose very being is a celebration of the gift of existence, nor is the neglectful absent mother of Winnicott equal to the mother who, going beyond limitations, makes the infant her primary maternal preoccupation. And then he talks about the economy of the gift. This was actually developed by somebody who took Rick Kerr's work and developed it. Rick Kerr perceives acts of goodness shared by humans as proceeding from an economy of the gift. Faith is the first response to evil and is seen as in the parent's and analyst's courage to incarnate into the life of the other. Not just to identify with the other's suffering, but to identify with the potentials yet to be realized. I think this is really important. When we're sitting with somebody, don't just look at the pathology. Look at the potential. Because we have to hold both. Be Fairbairnian, be Winnicottian. Look at both. The gift of love. The second movement of a love that survives introduces into the world of the infant and the patient the possibility of seeing parent and analyst as another person, as surrender to the process brings about a relinquishing of omnipotent control and an openness to the gift of love that's being offered. As I said before, so often a patient says, the only reason you love me is because, or you say you love me or care for me is because I pay you. Okay? In other words, I'm controlling you. And it's only until the patient has been fully free to yell at you, to tell you you're doing wrong, to whatever, and they see you're not going away. You're there, you're taking it. Do they realize you're not here just because I'm paying you? Nobody would do that. You know, you're here because there's something bigger. So I'm not controlling you. And someone can love me even when I don't try to coerce them to love me. So maybe my husband, when he says he loves me, really loves me. Not because I nag him or this or that. Maybe it's real. And you only can believe in love when you can see the other person as separate from you. If you feel that they are doing for you what they're doing because you're forcing them, there's no such thing as love. You can't experience it. So this is part of this mutual recognition, that you have to suffer that crucifixion and realize that person's separate, I'm separate, and they still love me. The gift of hope, the empowering third in gratitude and resurrection. The gifts of faith and love create a passage for the arrival of the gift of hope, of things radically new, of goodness rebirthed. Let's see, how are we doing on time here? Okay. We're doing good. All right. Jessica Benjamin says, within the paradigm of the analytic dyad, what the patient initially finds beneficial is opening to the analyst's independent mind is the possibility there really can be another mind that tunes into his own. When the analyst is empathic, for instance, the empathy is coming from an outside other. As Winnicott put it in the nursing metaphor, in the use of an object and relating through identifications, such understanding is not me nutriment, it is real. The milk is coming from an outside breast, not from something that is under my own omnipotent control. By the same token, this relinquishing of omnipotent control is what makes it valuable to the patient, because it means that there is somebody out there from whom I can receive and learn something that is not auto-generated, coming from me. There is somebody, an other out there whom I might connect to. In short, since the outside can be a source of goodness, it becomes safe and even desirable to go outside. Otherness is not simply inherently threatening. So for instance, you have a patient who had parents that didn't care about them, didn't take care of them. They learned, I better not depend on anyone. I'm going to figure things out for myself. And so the person comes in, they're very independent. They come to session, they did the research on their diagnosis. They did the research on what you should do with their diagnosis. They say, well, I checked out with this person, that person, and you're sitting there going, and thinking in your mind, well, they don't need me for anything, you know, because they're giving you the message, I can't trust anybody to give me what I need. I better do it for myself. And it's only going through this process that goes through crucifixion where the patient ends up at a point where they realize, I'm going to have to lean on you. I'm going to have to depend on you. I'm going to have to trust that maybe you understand something I don't. Or maybe you've made an interpretation that never occurred to them, or maybe they shared a dream that to them is just really stupid or crazy, like, well, it's just because I had pizza last night, you know? And you're able to have an interpretation that gives them an understanding that they never realized, that they begin to think, well, maybe you have something you can give me. When the person believes that, they see that they can accept something from someone else. Okay? So important. That's the basis of gratitude. If you don't believe that the other person can give you something that you really didn't deserve, but they're giving it to you because they care, until you can see that, there's no basis for gratitude. I forced you to do it. Why should I be grateful? Do you see the importance of seeing the other as another person? This is where gratitude comes in. Gratitude and the economy of the gift. Okay. Recur positions gratitude at the height of the path of mutual recognition. Gratitude goes beyond a recognition that merely understands the roles of mother and infant, analyst and patient. Gratitude goes beyond a recognition of the otherness of mother and infant, of analyst and patient. Gratitude surrenders to the asymmetrical position. Gratitude acknowledges dependency upon another whose grace has been received. I acknowledge that I am dependent on you. Gratitude is the first moment of the gift being accepted as a gift. Okay. What about reciprocity? Gratitude for a gift gives a dilemma. How can gratitude be expressed if a gift back cancels out the first gift? How can I express gratitude without actually canceling your gift out? And Derrida talked about that, but there's also research, and Ricoeur talks about it. Maori practice points to a universal desire to pass the gift on. In his attempt to address the problem of receiving a gift, Ricoeur invokes Moss's work on gifting practices among tribal groups. In groups like the Maori, the gift carries a magical power that binds the community together, a power that presses to be passed on. Ricoeur demystifies these practices and establishes that, in fact, the Maori practice points to a universal desire to pass on the gift as part of the action of gratitude. The notion is apparent in the third definition of gratitude. Empirical research supports this. In a recent study, participants in a group engaged in a repetitive and tedious eye-hand coordination task, which had to be aborted and retaken due to an alleged computer failure. At this point in the experiment, a benefactor who was actually a member of the research team offered to help the frustrated participant and was able to solve the computer problem, making it unnecessary for the participant to repeat the task. This gratitude group was then compared to a neutral control group who completed the task with no computer difficulty and no benefactor. So one group had difficulties with the computer, couldn't get it, and a good person came and helped them. In the other control group, there was no problem with the computer, and so they didn't need someone to help them. Okay. The gratitude group was then compared with a neutral group control group who completed the task with no computer difficulty. Members of both groups were then asked, both by the benefactor or a complete stranger, if they would be willing to help with a difficult task. So later on, they asked them. They discovered that participants who experienced the situation where they were helped and it evoked gratitude spent more time helping both the benefactor and strangers alike than participants who had not experienced gratitude. The findings were understood to demonstrate that pro-social behavior is increased by gratitude, and pro-social behavior subsequent to gratitude exists independently from a motivation to reciprocate. In other words, the people that were helped didn't feel that they just had to help the person that helped them. A total stranger came and they were willing to help them. So that the feeling of gratitude then builds in us a desire to help somebody else. Okay? And remember, taking this back to resurrection, what happened after the resurrection? We were given gifts, weren't we? The Son was grateful to the Father for having resurrected him. The disciples were grateful to Christ for having resurrected. The Holy Spirit was given. Gifts were poured out, and we utilize those gifts. There's a connection between resurrection and gratitude and gift giving. Okay? A ready illustration of Ricoeur's idea of wanting to pass the gift forward is seen in the parent-child relationship. The early smiles and coos of the infant bring delight to the parents, the earliest response of a child to the good that it's receiving. As the child matures, it finds little in its power to give beyond verbal expressions of gratitude that might pay the parents back for their efforts. A child's greatest expression of gratitude to the parent occurs in time when the good gifts of faith and love that the child has received are given to someone else. This resurrection and duplication of the internalized good parent is the gift of hope that the parent receives. The parent's hope is fortified as the economy of the gift recycles through the lives of their children. Hope is further created for the parent as the new birth of transformation of faith and love is transmitted by their children to their own communities of relationships. In other words, saying thank you to the parents is not the ultimate gift of gratitude. The ultimate gift is when the child goes into the world and gives the gift of love and hope to others. And haven't we seen this with our patients as well? When our patients have benefited from us, they go to their neighbor and they interpret for them, or they tell them, they say, they hear our voice in their head, and they pass the gift on because they've been helped. That is resurrection. Do you see that? It is the resurrection of the gift that was given. Ricoeur's economy of the gift resurrects in generation after generation, and it's more than just the resuscitation of originary goodness. Devin Singh has this beautiful quotation. The possibility opened up through the resurrection is the future of history. It portrays the radically new that comes to transform history, not merely to interrupt it. The surplus of meaning in the resurrection contributes to new possible meanings for reality. The ordinary of existence is ruptured, and God's new possibilities have entered our realm. As a historian discovers hope in the mode of memory, the prophet shapes memory in the mode of hope. Our past and present must be viewed in the light of the future. They are the past and present of things future. Resurrection has a surplus of meaning. In other words, that the good that comes after resurrection is even greater than what we realized from the past. You never realized with this patient the ripple effects. As your analyst loved you and cared for you, and out of that you sit with your patient, that analyst did not see the ripple effects in your life and then in your patient's life. And you look in your lives, you know. I was a little girl, 10 years old, and I listened to a radio broadcast of Clyde Narramore, who was a Christian psychologist. And I'd sit and I'd listen. And one day I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. He didn't know the gift that he was giving, okay? It was planted in me. And then that gift was planted in my patients and here. The gifts given by both parents and analysts evolve into far more than what is just. Parents and analysts are not merely good enough. Their faith and love become superabundant as they're multiplied through the economy of the gift. This is the economy of the gift, a cycle of mutual recognition and responsiveness to the abundance and affirmatory goodness of the gift of life and of the gift of the other, the yes in the sadness of our broken, finite world, that God is resurrecting and restoring even from the ashes of pain. What I would like to do at this time is actually show you a little movie. It won at the Sundance Film Festival that depicts Incarnation, Crucifixion, and Resurrection in terms that are far clearer than this particular presentation could give. I know that this was a very dense presentation, but what I'm wanting you to understand is you are doing God's work with patients. You are incarnating into their lives. You are coming to their level, feeling their pain, empathizing with them. You are then bearing the impact of being like their parents, how they're seeing you, the sins of the parents. You're bearing that cross. And as you survive it, you are bringing about a resurrection into their lives. Okay? And this is what we're to do. And resurrection exceeds the original brokenness. So hopefully, we'll be able to show this film. And I'd like you, as we look at it, to keep in mind where you are seeing incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection.